I'm Saraya Wintersmith in for Adam Riley. Tonight on Talking Politics, 9 months after Mayor Wu's big mass and cast clearing, more tents are returning to that area, and other areas of the city are seeing an influx of encampments and drug use too. So where is the effort now, and can Boston solve these issues alone? We'll dig into all of that ahead, but first, to the first conference of its kind in 50 years, the White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health, where President Biden laid out an ambitious goal this week to end hunger in this country by 2030.
If you look at your child and you can't feed your child, what the hell else matters? In America, no child should go to bed hungry.
Hundreds of policymakers, health activists, farmers, and business leaders came together to address that goal, including my next guests, State Senator Sal DiDomenico and State Representative Andy Vargas. Gentlemen, welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us, yes.
I want to start by asking both of you, as part of the Massachusetts contingent that got to go to the summit this week, did any particular issue, idea, or policy stick out to you?
I'll defer to the senator.
So yes, so what was eye-opening for I think both of us and for folks from Massachusetts was a lot of the policies that the president was talking about. We have begun to tackle in our state. One issue that the representative and I worked on very, very hard for the last couple of years was universal school meals, making sure that all children in our schools have meals across the entire Commonwealth. When the federal government took that away from us after the pandemic and their mind ended, they left it up to the states to foot the bill if we wanted to continue that. And to the efforts of the representative and I, and with the support of our leaders in both chambers, the Senate President, the Speaker, and the chairs of Ways and Means on both sides, we have extended that for 1 year with a $110 million investment to continue that. So that was one of the big issues that the president was talking about that we are continuing to do in the state. And, a whole host of other issues. I don't want to, lay them all out here. We don't have enough time to do that. But a lot of the things that he was talking about, we are piloting. So it was pretty impressive to see we were all on the same, kind of the same page to try to tackle this issue and try to end hunger by 2030. So there was something that it was eye-opening for all of us. And I'm so happy that he highlighted that on a national stage.
And Representative Vargas, same question.
Yeah, I think, it was encouraging to see that out of all the policies and principles that were discussed during the conference, the thing that got the most resounding applause every time was when universal school meals was brought up. And so when you think about all the different strategies and things that we can do to tackle hunger in our society, the fact that folks from all across the country were so enthusiastic about providing free school meals for every single kid, regardless of their background, their income, their documentation that they provide, whether they meet the income threshold, that was encouraging and showed that we really are on the glide path to doing what is a moral imperative here in Massachusetts, which is making sure we feed every child in our public schools. The other thing that kind of stood out to me was, we've talked a lot about food being, a way of tackling our health crisis as well. But we talked a lot about how 80 cents on the dollar for every dollar we spend in our healthcare system, 80 cents goes towards treating preventable diseases. And those preventable diseases are heavily influenced by the food that we eat. And so one of the arguments that we used to push universal school meals across the finish line last session to get the extension for the school year was around alleviating the costs of food on families because of inflation. But one of the other arguments that we need to talk about is that this is also going to reduce the costs on our healthcare system if we're able to ensure that every single American, and here in Massachusetts, every single resident of our Commonwealth is fed with a nutritious diet.
So thinking about food almost as medicine, I want to get into some numbers from the Greater Boston Food Bank. They have a survey released this June that estimated about a third of the state's population has experienced some sort of food insecurity during 2021, during the second year of the pandemic. One other crucial bullet point from that survey was that the increased cost in groceries is what drove slightly more than half of new food pantry users to seek out that help. Senator, I'll start with you. Talk a little bit about opportunities for Massachusetts to do even better to address hunger here at home. And is there anything you'd like to propose to your chamber's leadership in the upcoming year?
Sure. Yeah. There's, to tackle this issue, one particular issue is not going to solve the problem. We have to take a holistic approach here to try to make sure that we have several options for our residents and several avenues they can explore. And one is increasing SNAP benefits. We have been working very hard the last, I would say, 7 or 8 years to try to come up with a common application, which will allow residents of the state, when they apply for Mass Health, to automatically be enrolled in SNAP benefits if they qualify. There's about 700,000 people that are in that SNAP gap, where they're on Mass Health, and we believe they qualify for SNAP, and we're leaving federal dollars on the table if we don't access that money. Also, the president mentioned the child tax credit, which is a game changer for so many families that was taken away again. People didn't think we needed that any longer. And also increasing cash assistance for folks living in poverty. If you can believe it, there are 2 levels of poverty. There's poverty and deep poverty. And we shouldn't even be talking about poverty at all in a state like ours, in a country like ours as well. But there are folks that are living very, very, paycheck to paycheck and don't know where their next meal is going to come from, and making tough choices for rent, for medication, and food. And food is always, unfortunately, the one that goes by the wayside because they can't afford that for their families. So increasing cash assistance has been an issue that myself and Representative Vargas, Representative Decker from Cambridge has also been working hard on this. And we have increased the cash assistance 3 times in the last budget, which was the first time in 20 years for our state to do that. So getting additional funds in the hands of people who need it the most will help offset these increasing costs. And we have to continue doing that. So 3 times last 3 years, we're going for that 4th year, 5th year, 6th year to continue that momentum. But the SNAP benefits are crucial, making sure that we get that money in people's hands. So that common application is a big way to get those folks who don't have the time to apply independently, don't know where to go, fear government offices. And now we're on a path where we can try to get some more funding in their hands.
Representative Vargas, I'm glad that your State House colleague is mentioning SNAP benefits. We know that more than 500,000 households are part of that Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and they will see their benefits increase by an average of about $25 to $30 starting next month. That means a family of 4 will have about $940 each month to help buy food. And that is less than the maximum amount the USDA recommends that a family of that size, presumably with 2 parents and 2 children, spends. Your colleague may have answered this already a little bit, but do you think that's enough to help folks in Massachusetts combat hunger? 30 seconds.
No, I mean, we're one of the most expensive places to live in the country and probably in the world. And so there's so much more that we need to do to make sure that families can afford to even live here. And so that includes, yes, SNAP assistance, TANF assistance, but also dealing with the core issues that we have here in Massachusetts around our housing crisis, which makes up so much of the monthly bills that families have. And so when we think about food, it's really an integrated issue that we have to think about from a health perspective, from an economic perspective, and from even a housing perspective, knowing that so many families are making the decision between paying the rent or paying the mortgage and buying a nutritious meal. So there's so much more we have to do here in Massachusetts. We're leading the way, but it's not a time for us to pat ourselves on the back when so many people are still hungry here. And we're committed to continuing to do that work by ensuring that we have universal school meals, by passing the Hunger-Free Campus Initiative that focuses on nutrition at the college level, and ensuring that we're dealing with the root causes of poverty and malnutrition like housing and job security.
All right. We'll be watching your actions at the State House. Senator Sally Domenico, Representative Andy Vargas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When Mayor Michelle Wu launched a major push to clean up the intersection known as Mass and Cass last winter, the tents were removed, the streets were cleared, and dozens of the people who'd been living there found housing in temporary city-run spaces. But in the months since, encampments have been returning, and drug activity has been increasing in the area, something the mayor acknowledged when I spoke to her at an event earlier this week.
There's a regular rhythm where tents are taken down and moved, and they've been going back up, and so we're trying to address that, but it's not the same as where we were a year ago with fortified encampments and people who have been truly residing on the streets for years at that point. We've been seeing a steady flow of folks into transitional housing and from transitional housing into permanent housing, but we have a long way to go.
I'm joined now by GBH News reporter Tori Bedford, who's been closely covering the issues at Mass and Cass. Yahaira Lopez, a founding member of the South End Roxbury Community Partnership, and Andy Waxman, Regional Vice President of the Community Builders Incorporated, which, along with the Pine Street Inn, is hoping to develop more than 100 units of permanent housing for the formerly unhoused. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Yahaira, I'm going to start with you. You live in Randolph now, but you grew up in the area and you have impacted families still in the immediate vicinity of Mass and Cass. Can you quickly just remind folks what encampments can mean for people who live in homes or own businesses in the area?
I think what it boils down to is when we're talking about communities who are already in the throes of crisis, financial burdens, and are going through what happens when you're living in low income communities, we're adding trauma on top of stressors of what's happening in your household to what happens outside of your household, right? And so I think that in this community, what we're seeing is just a lot of sadness. And I think that we often forget what that does to people who are already trying to deal with their own life stressors, their financial crisis, what they got going on in their home, and also for families who have lost loved ones to addiction. And seeing that every day, and trying to cope with that on their doorsteps, waking up like my mom, my mom finds feces on her doorsteps, needles on her doorsteps, individuals having, full-blown sexual intercourse on her steps or even on the back of her home, so we're talking about a crisis that is just, I don't even know if there's any words to explain that.
Right. Tori, it's a cycle you've described in your writing as seemingly unending. And when your story uncovered the scope of money the Boston Police Department earned in overtime, this is under our former mayor, I think a lot of people, certainly me, thought, wow, what could that money be going towards? Have you talked to any advocates about what kind of other things we could be spending that money on?
Yeah, so we were able to obtain payroll data from 2019 and 2020 over the course of about a year and a half that showed that the Boston Police Department, just in the area of Mass and Cass, made roughly $4 million just in overtime. And in 2019, during Operation Clean Sweep, which was a very controversial police clearing of the area where police gave no warning, over I think 32 arrests were made, that was $20,500. That number was not budgeted into anything. That number was not, there was no discussion about how that was, the resources that was going to go towards. I think that, and Andy can speak to this as well, when, when solutions are proposed, it's very difficult to get funding for things like housing. It's very difficult, there's a lot of community meetings where there's opposition. There is, people will say, we don't want this, we don't want,
this type of thing.
Yeah, we don't want a safe, a space to use for people to openly use drugs, or a safe consumption site, or needle exchanges. We don't want these other things in our neighborhood. But there's a discussion around that. And so I think what I heard from a lot of public policy experts and mental health advocates was that there really was no discussion to pre-approve this funding in the area. And so, the proposals for other options, I think it includes housing, but primarily, as Yahaira just talked about, it's about addressing the trauma. So everybody who's out there, and I think there's residents who are unhappy, business owners who are unhappy, but the people who are coming there for resources, whether that's methadone or detox or a place to use drugs with impunity or whatever, nobody there is happy either. There is this myth that people can come there and get whatever they need, and those resources are not available to those people. So nobody is satisfied with the system that is in place, and I think the question that was presented by a lot of public policy experts was, if we're going to spend $4 million just on police overtime in that area, are we perpetuating this cycle? Are we perpetuating these problems that will continue to exist?
Andy Waxman, I want to bring you in now because a key part of the mayor's strategy on this has not just been housing, but housing that's distinctive from shelters. Your nonprofit has put forward this proposal around the Comfort Inn in Dorchester. A shout out to Neponsit. Can you talk about some of the factors that make it hard to tackle this one part of this one aspect of the solution, which is finding somewhere to put people?
Yep. It's very, as folks are saying, the long-term solution is a place for people to live, combined with the services, the support that people need to transition from long-term homelessness, and getting approval to zoning approval and funding are two key barriers. And very happy that the mayor announced yesterday a process to streamline approval processes for affordable housing. I and other colleagues have been in conversations with the mayor's office of housing around how to improve those processes, and certainly the mayor and the governor have put more money for this kind of supportive housing, which is great. There's a need for more of it. There's a need for more funding. There's a lot of proposals, but there's been some very positive steps, and we're very happy about that.
And talk a little bit about the idea of community resistance. I'm sure you have an understanding of why people would object to such a development, the way Tori was just describing, but you're also living the reality of being a neighbor to a supportive housing facility here in the city. How and why did your family make that decision?
Honestly, we didn't make that decision. I mean, I've lived in the same place in Jamaica Plain in Boston for 20 years. It was 5 years after I moved there that I understood that it was supportive housing. The place that I vote, where my precinct is, I went into that building a number of times, didn't know what it was, because I think that's a key. I've raised my kids are teenagers now. They've always lived nearby. Place that is run by the Pine Street Inn. Never knew what it was until I started working with them. So I think a lot of great stuff was happening inside that building. I didn't even know about it, and so I think there's a lot of misperceptions about how permanent supportive housing works, and it's been very successful. And I'm proud that in my neighborhood I live right nearby that.
Yahaira, the mayor says that she and her team and members of the Boston City Council will travel out to Long Island next week as part of a push to make a case for more state and regional investment in this issue. Aside from potentially reopening Long Island, what's one thing you'd like to hear from either the current governor or those campaigning, running to hold the office? How would you want them to address this issue?
So one, I want to kind of address the whole thing with Long Island. To fix Long Island, it's not happening overnight. Mm-hmm. We're talking about years of renovation of a building that has been sitting there with no one monitoring, infrastructures that are probably falling apart. And I think that we all know this. I think that for us as a community and as a group of community members who started this, community-led, group, when we have people who are in recovery, have been on Mass Ave, I think that we want people to stick to what they campaign for. Because it often feels that when too many players are at the table, we start kind of being divided as far as who we want to, how can I say it in a nice way? Who we want to listen to more, whose voices matter, and how much money's on the table, right? And so I think that there's a lot of stuff that we need to unpack in this conversation, because as the gentleman from Pine Street, a lot of the nonprofits are the heart and soul of the work. And the low paying jobs, the lowest paying staff members are the ones who are doing the job. And it's not easy when you're a case manager and you know that you can't find housing for your clients, when you know that the waiting list for therapists and counseling are long, right? We need to be realistic about this conversation and knowing that we have created a system that I don't even know we can repair, because we've never dedicated time and effort to really put forward what needs to happen in the social service field.
It sounds like at the very least, potentially more money for those on the ground actually performing the work, and certainly more facilities and services available.
Right.
Andy, going back to you, the state is one of your major funders. At the same time, critics have said the state needs to be doing more to support Boston in this area. In your view, could the state be doing more?
I mean, there's always more to do. There's always more funding that can be provided. At the same time, I'll say, the current governor, the housing choice legislation that passed last year is trying to facilitate more housing production throughout the state. I think that was a very positive, important step because, at the community builders, we have affordable housing that we've developed in a number of different parts of the state. And so not only do we work in the city of Boston, but other parts of the state as well. And so having that zoning approval processes simplified is really critical to have that, to solve this.
Zoning gets kind of boring and super detailed, but can you quickly say what that streamlining will do? Like, how will that benefit the work that you do?
In order to build, you need to have approval. There has to be zoning approval, and so set what those rules are. It's the rules of the road for developing. And so, in the past, if you had to have 2/3 of a town, vote to approve any change in the zoning, really hard barrier to so moving that down to a 50% approval just makes it much more likely that zoning that allows for more development to happen, that could happen, makes it happen much more quickly or happen at all, honestly.
And does that save you money?
It certainly does. I mean, we in Jamaica Plain, again, I'm with the community builders, but we partner with the Pine Street Inn, and we developed a property 4 blocks from where I live, and we got slowed down in a zoning issue, and that delay increased costs by 10% because we had about a year long of a delay. So having the money and the zoning are certainly tied to each other as well.
And Tori, I want to give the last word to you here. You heard the mayor say that there's a long way to go on this issue, and part of that long way is the state and regional approach. But the Baker-Polito administration is on its way out. Neither of the gubernatorial candidates have homelessness or substance use disorder listed as a priority of what they mean to address. What do you think this means for this issue politically?
I think that's a really good question. And going back to your previous question about, you mentioned fulfilling these campaign promises. I think a lot of public policy or public health experts that I spoke to have said very publicly, politicians and community leaders will say, we really prioritize these things. We prioritize social work. We prioritize housing. We really want public health to be the priority and the focus, and we'll put funding towards that. When you actually look at the numbers, that's not the case. It's really not the case. And so I think it would really, obviously, I looked at these numbers from 2019 and 2020. I reached out to former Mayor Walsh, who's now the U.S. Labor Secretary, and he obviously couldn't provide comment because he's the Labor Secretary. But I do think that the Wu administration has a responsibility. If you look at the budget, there's really nothing specifically allocated for mass and cast, right? Within the plans, there's no funding. I think last January, Mayor Wu had said, we're going to increase policing in the area, and now arrests have gone up 81%. I don't know that that is giving people the results that they wanted to see, and there are research-backed solutions that that have been proven to help people in other areas and solve these problems. But it doesn't seem like the funding is actually being allocated in the ways that it was promised. And it does seem that within the last few years, since Long Island was shut down in 2014, there has just been an increase in policing, an increased police presence, an increase in arrests, and these other problems like crime, violence, homelessness, substance use, this concentration, it gets swept out and then it comes right back. And I think that some of the public policy experts I spoke to were like, we're doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, where you also have politicians making promises that funds will be allocated and then not saying how much. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, I'm not saying it was hidden necessarily because it was reported in overtime that obviously had to be obtained by us, but...
Thanks to your reporting, right?
Well, thanks, but I just mean that this is money that's already being spent, right? These are funds that have already been spent, and I think that it would really behoove the administration to just have more transparency around it and say, well, we're reducing this because it's not working and that's research-backed, right? Or we're increasing this because we know that that's effective. And I just want to see some evidence that these promises are being fulfilled. I will say the Wu administration placing more than 150 people in transitional housing, some people in permanent housing. There are different kinds of programs. That was a very different move than we have seen in previous administrations.
To her credit.
Yes, but I do think that and she has said there's more to be done, the work continues. I think that there needs to just be more transparency around the money behind it and who's getting what money. And, when she is making decisions about who is going to get that money, where does that come from? There are also issues with the police and overtime, but that's also something the city could exert control over.
Right.
So it's this, there are so many factors here, but I think that ultimately it comes down to having more transparency so that the people who are making decisions, the stakeholders, can actually have some agency and have a conversation about how that money is spent.
Excellent. I think that's all the time that we have for this discussion. Yahaira Lopez, Tori Bedford, Andy Waxman, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight. Adam will be back next week. Don't forget to tell us what you think. The email is talkingpolitics@wgbh.org. The website is gbhnews.org/talkingpolitics. For now, thanks for watching and good night.